My ex is getting married, but he doesn't know I'm the one planning his wedding. 5 years ago, my ex's parents told me I'd never be good enough for their son, and now here they were, sitting across from me, asking me to be their family's wedding coordinator. I laughed at first and simply gestured toward the door. I think you should find another planner. My ex's mom, Kathy, slid a blank check across the desk. I don't think you understand. Our budget is unlimited, and we know your business is struggling. This is practically charity. Don't poor people love charity? Her husband smiled. What's your company motto? We don't say no to your dreams, he smirked. And our dream, Kathy added slowly, is for you to plan the perfect society wedding for our son. If you refuse us, well, you'll find out that shutting down a small business is pretty easy. They pushed a contract forward with the NDA clause highlighted. I prepared myself for everything that first meeting. Everything except for Logan's shocked face when he walked in and saw me. His fiancée, Angela, walked over, already gushing about how excited she was to get married. You come highly recommended. His parents said you were the best. Yeah, the best, Logan said sarcastically, his jaw tight from both hurt and rage. I kept my voice professional. Let's discuss your vision for the wedding. For 2 hours, I took notes while Logan's eyes burned holes through me. When Angela stepped out to take a call, Logan pressed, "Why are you here? Why are you doing this?" I couldn't tell him the truth. The NDA was clear. It's my job. Logan laughed. Your job? What a load of BS. You've already hurt me once, and now you're here to ruin my chance at happiness? I pressed my lips together and shook my head. No, your wedding will be perfect. I promise. But it wasn't easy. Each time we settled on certain details for the wedding, his parents would call me adding to the request. Our dream is for peonies to be sprinkled everywhere. My favorite flower. The one I'd carried in my hands when Logan proposed. Our dream is for you to wear your old blue dress to the wedding. The dress I'd worn the day I'd met his parents. Each request was a knife twist, but I smiled and wrote them down, staying true to the motto, we don't say no to your dreams. But what they didn't realize was that the more things they coldly added, the more Logan started piecing things together. Then 2 weeks before the wedding, he confronted his parents. You hired her, didn't you? His voice shook. We're helping her, Kathy said calmly, showing her what she missed out on, what she wasn't allowed to have. It's just closure, sweetie. You're sick, he breathed. Sick? His dad laughed. Oh, please. We've given you the perfect life. Money, career, even a fiancé who actually suits you. Logan stormed out and found me in the hallway. Tell me they forced you. Tell me you didn't choose this. But I kept my mouth shut. If you can't tell me that, then at least tell me why you left me 5 years ago. Was it them? Did my parents say something to you? I met his eyes with the same hurt expression. It doesn't matter anymore. The rehearsal dinner was at the country club his parents belonged to. The same one where they'd told me I didn't belong 5 years ago. Kathy cornered me before dinner. Give a toast tonight to the happy couple, she grinned, but at this point I was immune to their cruelty. Real love, I said, looking directly at Logan, doesn't need anyone's approval. Real love is worth fighting for, even when the whole world tells you you're not enough. So to the happy couple, congratulations on finding real love. I meant each word with all my heart. After dinner, Logan found me on the terrace. I never stopped loving you, he said. I quickly covered his mouth with my hands, shaking my head at him. No, Logan, we're 5 years too late. If I get married tomorrow, my parents win, he argued. But if we try again, they lose. And we win. Don't you want to win? To get back at them? I didn't answer. I just walked away. The wedding day was perfect. Every peony in place. Every detail Kathy had demanded to torture me was exactly right, down to the blue dress. I was in the bridal suite doing final touches on the bouquet when Angela walked in alone, already in her wedding dress. You're beautiful, I said. I know who you are, she said directly. My hands froze on the ribbons. Actually, I've kinda always known. He says your name in his sleep sometimes. My heart broke for her. Angela, I'm so sorry. I tried to refuse the job. She smiled gently. I know that too. His parents aren't as subtle as they think. She sat down carefully, protecting the dress. I loved him enough to pretend I didn't know. To pretend those peonies were my choice. He loves you, I tried telling her. She looked at me in the mirror. But you loved him enough to let him go. To build this whole business on a motto about not saying no to dreams because they said no to yours. Tears began sliding down her perfect makeup. They hired you to hurt you. To make you watch him marry someone they chose. But I'm hurt too. She turned to face me directly. Are you going to take my husband away from me? I met Angela's eyes in the mirror and picked my words like I was walking through a minefield. The NDA sat in my mind like a wall I couldn't climb over. I couldn't trash the family or tell her they forced me into this job, but I could give her something. I won't take your husband away from you today, I said quietly, keeping my voice level even though my chest felt like it was squeezed in a vice. But you deserve to make this choice with open eyes, not blind ones. My hands went back to the ribbons on her bouquet, giving me something to do while the weight of what I'd just said hung between us. Angela's hands shook a little as she reached up to adjust her veil. The fabric slipped through her fingers twice before she got it right. She turned to face me directly, her makeup perfect except for those tears that kept threatening to spill over. Is there anything I absolutely need to know before I walk down that aisle? She asked. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the fear underneath. I wanted to tell her everything. About 5 years ago. About the threats. About why I really left Logan. But the NDA was clear and they'd destroy my business in a heartbeat. So I deflected the best way I could. Powerful people sometimes play games with other people's lives, I said, watching her face carefully to see if she understood. They move pieces around like we're all part of their plan. Angela's eyes got wider and then narrowed as she processed what I was saying. She nodded slowly, understanding way more than the actual words I'd given her. The words came out before I could stop them. I loved Logan once. My voice cracked a little on his name. Part of me probably always will. I set down the bouquet and looked at her straight on because she deserved that much honesty. But I won't act on those feelings during your moment. This day is yours, not mine. The confession hung in the air between us like smoke. Angela's whole face changed. The guarded look melted into something that looked almost like respect, which I definitely hadn't expected. "Thank you for telling me that much," she whispered. Then she did something that completely threw me. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her emails. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward me. The emails were from 3 months ago. Kathy's name was right there at the top. I read through them quickly, my heart picking up speed with each line. Kathy had specified peonies everywhere, explained they were a family tradition that meant so much to Logan. Except Angela knew they weren't. She'd asked Logan's grandmother about it and got a confused look in return. "I've been collecting evidence," Angela said softly. "I knew something was wrong, but I loved him enough to pretend I didn't see it." She looked at me with this sad, knowing expression. "Can you keep the wedding timeline flexible? I need time to think." My respect for her shot way up in that moment. She'd been 3 steps ahead this whole time, quietly gathering proof while everyone thought she was just a sweet, naive bride. I nodded fast. "I'll build in every buffer I can. You'll have the time you need." A knock on the door made us both jump. Angela quickly put her phone away and I grabbed the bouquet again, trying to look busy and professional. The door opened and Logan walked in. His face was carefully calm, but his eyes were doing that desperate searching thing, looking at me with questions he couldn't ask out loud. The 3 of us just stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Everyone was performing calm while tension crackled under the surface like electricity before a storm. It was the most uncomfortable triangle I'd ever been part of. Angela reached for Logan's hand and squeezed it. He squeezed back, but his eyes kept sliding over to me, then back to her, then to me again. I couldn't take it anymore. "I need to check on the ceremony setup," I said, keeping my voice professional and steady. I slipped past them and into the corridor, my hands shaking now that I was alone. I found Bree near the ballroom entrance, clipboard in hand, looking calm and capable like always. "Hold it, Prelude B," I said quietly. It was our contingency code, the one we'd set up for emergencies when we needed to extend the timeline without making it obvious. She didn't ask questions, just nodded and pulled out her phone. Within seconds, she was texting the musicians and photographer with the adjusted cues. My hands were still shaking, but I kept my voice professional as I confirmed the changes with her. Before I could catch my breath, Kathy appeared at my coordinator's desk near the ballroom. She moved fast for someone in heels that expensive. "We need changes to the photo display," she said, her voice sharp. She pointed to the boards I'd set up with engagement photos. "Add the ones from the garden party and the sailing trip." My stomach dropped. Those weren't random photos. The garden party was where Logan first told me he loved me. The sailing trip was our last vacation together before his parents destroyed everything. Edward appeared beside her like they'd planned this ambush. "Just remember the penalty clauses in our contract," he said casually, like he was talking about the weather. It would be so easy to shut down a small business. One call to the right people. The familiar sting of their cruelty hit me, but something was different this time. Instead of making me want to cry or give up, I felt it transform into something cold and focused. I'd spent 5 years building myself back up from what they did to me. I wasn't that scared girl anymore. "I'll make the changes," I said evenly. They walked away looking satisfied, and I immediately headed for a service hallway where I could make a private call. Miranda answered on the second ring. "I need to know the exact boundaries of the NDA," I said, keeping my voice low. "What legally counts as disparagement?" She was quiet for a second, probably pulling up the contract on her computer. "You can't make false accusations or reveal confidential family information," she explained. "But past events that happened to you personally aren't covered by the current agreement. Your own experiences are yours to share." Relief flooded through me, even though I was still trapped by their threats about destroying my business. At least I had some room to maneuver. I thanked her and hung up just as Nelson, the florist, came around the corner looking stressed. "We have a problem with part of the peony delivery," he said. "There's a delay with the supplier. I'm proposing substitutions that will look identical to guests, but I need your approval." I approved his backup plan immediately, grateful for a problem I could actually solve. The logistics helped me breathe. This was something concrete, something I could fix with a simple decision instead of all the emotional landmines everywhere else. Nelson nodded and headed back to the loading dock. I was making my way back toward the ceremony space when Logan caught me alone in a quiet hallway. He grabbed my arm gently, not hard, but urgent. "Please," he said, and his voice cracked. "Tell me the truth about why you left 5 years ago." 5 years of hurt and confusion were written all over his face. I wanted to tell him everything right there. About his parents cornering me at this exact country club, threatening my scholarship, my family's reputation, everything I had unless I disappeared. But not here. Not now. Not when he was supposed to be getting married in less than an hour. After, I promised him, my voice firm even though my heart was breaking at the pain in his eyes. We'll have that conversation after the event is over. After, I repeated, pulling my arm back gently. He stood there looking lost, and I walked away before I could change my mind and tell him everything. I headed back toward the main ballroom, checking my phone for the timeline and pushing down the ache in my chest. The ceremony was supposed to start in 90 minutes, and I had 100 details to confirm before guests started arriving. I spotted Bree near the entrance coordinating with the venue staff and gave her a quick nod before turning down the corridor toward the bridal suite. I needed to check on Angela one more time, make sure her makeup was holding up after those tears. The door was slightly open when I got there, and I knocked softly before stepping inside. Angela was sitting at the vanity again, but this time she had a small white card in her hand and was writing something with careful, deliberate strokes. Her handwriting was neat and precise even though her hand shook slightly. I watched her finish whatever she was writing, then fold the card once and slide it into a cream-colored envelope. She sealed it carefully, pressing the flap down with her thumb, then turned to look at me directly. Her eyes were clear now, makeup fixed, but something had shifted in her expression. She held out the envelope and I took it automatically, feeling the weight of expensive paper stock between my fingers. She told me to deliver it only if needed, her voice steady and calm, and I understood immediately what she meant even though she didn't explain further. The trust in that gesture settled on my shoulders like a physical thing, and I tucked the envelope carefully into my portfolio between my timeline sheets and vendor contact list. Her composure impressed me because she was clearly preparing for multiple possible outcomes, thinking through scenarios and backup plans while most brides would be falling apart. I promised her I'd keep it safe and she nodded once, then stood up and smoothed down her dress with both hands. She asked me to give her 5 more minutes alone and I agreed, backing out of the suite and closing the door softly behind me. The ballroom was starting to fill with early arrivals when I got back to the main space, and I immediately spotted trouble brewing near the seating chart display. 3 of Kathy's friends were clustered around the table assignments, their voices getting louder as they compared their placement to each other. One woman in a pale yellow dress was insisting she should be at table 4 instead of table 7, while another was complaining that her husband's business partner got better positioning. I walked over quickly, putting on my most professional smile even though my jaw was already starting to ache from forced politeness. The next 20 minutes were exhausting as I diplomatically shuffled place cards and soothed egos without actually humiliating anyone or disrupting Kathy's carefully planned status hierarchy. The petty power games drained me more than any of the actual wedding logistics, but I handled each complaint with professional grace and managed to find solutions that left everyone feeling somewhat satisfied. By the time I got everyone seated where they wanted to be, or at least convinced them their new spots were actually better, my face hurt from smiling and my feet were killing me in these heels. I made a mental note to add an extra fee to my invoice for managing difficult guests, because this level of hand-holding was beyond normal coordination work. Bree found me near the gift table and pulled me aside, her phone already out and angled toward me. She showed me the screen where social media posts were popping up from society gossipers and wedding bloggers, all gushing about the fairy tale peony wedding and speculating about the planner's creative vision. Someone had posted photos of the ceremony space with the white chairs and pink arrangements, calling it dreamy and romantic. Another post was analyzing the color palette and predicting this would be the wedding of the season. The online attention made my stomach twist with nerves because it meant more scrutiny on every single detail, more eyes watching for any mistake that Kathy could use as ammunition against me later. I knew she was probably monitoring these posts too, waiting for any slip-up she could weaponize in her ongoing campaign to torture me. I told Bree to keep monitoring the social media, but not to engage with any of the posts or respond to comments. We needed to stay professional and let the wedding speak for itself without getting pulled into online speculation. She nodded and tucked her phone away, then headed back to check on the catering staff in the kitchen. I made my way over to where the musicians were setting up near the ceremony space, weaving between chairs and stepping carefully around equipment cases. The band leader looked up when I approached and I kept my voice low as I explained what I needed. I asked him to add an extra instrumental loop to the processional sequence, building in a natural pause point in case Angela needed time to decide anything before walking down the aisle. He understood immediately without me having to explain the full situation, his eyes showing that professional solidarity that comes from years of working weddings and seeing all kinds of drama. He pulled out his sheet music and made notes with a pencil, adjusting the arrangement right there while I watched. He nodded at me when he was done, and I thanked him quietly, feeling like these small acts of protection were all I could really offer anyone today. The ceremony was going to happen no matter what, but at least I could give Angela some breathing room if she needed it. I was checking the gift table arrangements when I heard Edward's voice nearby, talking to another guest in that casual tone that made cruel comments sound like friendly observations. He was standing maybe 10 feet away with an older man in an expensive suit, and his words carried just enough for me to hear them clearly. He mentioned something about girls from nowhere finally getting to see what real success looks like, and the casual cruelty landed exactly where he intended it to land. The comment was meant for me even though he never looked my direction. Just another reminder that I didn't belong in their world, and never would. I filed the remark away in my memory, keeping my expression completely neutral while rage simmered underneath my professional mask. One day these comments might matter, but today wasn't that day. Today I had a job to do, and letting Edward get under my skin would only give him more satisfaction. I turned away and headed back toward the bridal suite, checking my watch and seeing we were down to 5 minutes before the processional was supposed to start. Angela was standing by the window when I walked in, her veil already in place and her bouquet resting on the vanity. She turned when she heard me and asked me directly what it felt like to leave someone I loved all those years ago. The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly, telling her it was lonely and devastating, not noble or empowering like people sometimes made it sound in movies or books. Leaving Logan had torn me apart, and I spent months barely functioning, building my business mostly because I needed something to focus on besides the pain. She absorbed my answer silently, her eyes going distant as she processed what I'd shared with her. I watched her face change as she thought through whatever decision she was wrestling with, and after a long moment she thanked me for being honest with her. I saw her squaring her shoulders with new resolve, that same composure from earlier settling back over her features. She picked up her bouquet and I helped her adjust her veil one final time. Then we headed toward the ceremony space together. My phone buzzed in my pocket as we walked, and I pulled it out quickly to check the message. It was from Miranda, a text clarifying the legal boundaries I'd asked about earlier. She explained that events from 5 years ago weren't covered by my current NDA with Kathy and Edward, but I needed to be careful not to make accusations about illegal acts publicly without solid proof to back them up. The legal distinction gave me a thread of hope, even though I was still boxed in by their threats about destroying my business if I stepped out of line. I took a screenshot of her message and tucked my phone away, feeling slightly less powerless than I had an hour ago. At least I knew where the boundaries were now, even if I wasn't sure yet how to use that information. I left Angela with her bridesmaids and made my way toward the groom's room to do a final check on Logan and his groomsmen. The door was open and I could see inside where Logan was standing near the window, his jacket on and his tie perfectly straight. But his attention was fixed on the peony arrangements that Nelson had positioned around the room earlier, and I watched his face go pale and then red as he stared at them. He was clearly connecting dots he hadn't seen before, realizing these flowers matched details he'd never actually approved himself. His parents had literally restaged moments from our relationship without his knowledge or permission, using his own wedding as a stage for their manipulation. I stood in the doorway watching as he gripped the edge of a table, his knuckles going white with the force of his grip. The disgust on his face was visible even from where I stood, and I could see him processing his own complicity in letting his parents control so much of his life. I backed away quietly before he noticed me watching, giving him privacy for whatever he was feeling. Nelson caught me near the ceremony entrance and gave me a quick update on the peony situation, showing me how he'd worked magic with the substituted flowers. No guest would notice the difference because he'd matched the colors and sizes perfectly, positioning arrangements throughout the venue exactly where they were supposed to be. I signed his revised delivery acknowledgement form, grateful for his professionalism and discretion throughout this whole mess. The small victory of solving this problem without any drama felt significant, amid all the emotional chaos swirling around everyone today. At least the flowers looked perfect, even if everything else was falling apart. Kathy appeared beside me suddenly, her voice sharp as she gave me new instructions about positioning myself conspicuously in my blue dress during the ceremony, where guests could see me clearly. She wanted me visible, wanted everyone to see me watching Logan marry someone else, one final twist of the knife she'd been turning all day. But I countered immediately with a logistical excuse about needing to monitor the musicians from backstage, explaining that someone had to cue the processional timing and manage any technical issues that came up. She narrowed her eyes at me, clearly suspicious of my reasoning, but she couldn't argue with the operational logic without admitting she just wanted to humiliate me publicly. I escaped to my coordinator's position near the sound booth, and inside I was celebrating this tiny rebellion, even as I maintained perfect compliance on the surface with everything else she'd demanded. Bree appeared at my elbow moments later with her phone clutched tight in her hand, and her face looked serious in a way that made my stomach drop. She pulled me further behind the sound booth where guests couldn't see us, and pressed play on a voicemail recording without saying anything first. Kathy's voice came through the speaker crystal clear and cold as ice. She was threatening to end my company completely if I didn't follow every single instruction perfectly, and her tone made it obvious she meant every word. Bree had already timestamped the recording and backed it up to 3 different locations before showing me, and I watched her fingers move across her phone screen with practiced efficiency. The documentation felt like armor settling over my shoulders, even though I wasn't sure yet how to actually use it against them. I squeezed Bree's arm in thanks, and she nodded once before heading back to her position near the guest entrance. My hands shook slightly as I pulled out my own phone and opened my text thread with Miranda. I typed quickly about the threatening voicemail and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Her response came back within 2 minutes, telling me to preserve all communications, but warning me not to trigger defamation claims by going public without a clear strategy first. Her steady legal guidance felt like a lifeline when part of me just wanted to rage or panic or both at once. I forwarded her the audio file and felt slightly less powerless than I had 5 minutes ago. The processional music started right on cue, and I shifted my focus back to my coordinator position near the sound booth. Logan stood at the altar scanning the assembled guests like he was looking for an escape route that didn't exist. His discomfort was visible to anyone paying real attention, and I saw several guests in the back rows exchange concerned glances with each other. My chest tightened with sympathy for everyone trapped in this performance we were all putting on. Angela appeared at the threshold of the ballroom in her white dress and veil, and I caught her eye across the distance. I gave her the smallest nod to confirm the extra music loop was ready if she needed it, and she took a deep breath that I could see even from where I stood. She stepped forward slowly into the ballroom, buying herself thinking time with each measured step. The moment felt suspended, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The musicians moved into the extended loop I'd arranged with them, and Angela used the extra bars to lean close to Logan at the altar. Her voice was soft, but clear enough to carry to where I was standing. She asked him directly if he wanted a life that was theirs, or one that belonged to his parents. His response came immediately without hesitation. He said not like this, and I watched Angela's expression shift from uncertainty to something that looked like clarity washing over her face. The intimacy of their exchange felt both private and pivotal, even though 200 guests were witnessing it without understanding what they were actually seeing. Kathy and Edward exchanged alarmed glances from their front row seats, and Edward made an urgent signal to the officiant to move the ceremony along faster. I held firm on the timeline buffer I'd built in, and signaled the musicians to continue the loop until Angela gave me the sign she was ready. My small act of controlled defiance felt enormous in my chest, like I was finally pushing back against their manipulation in a way that mattered. Angela turned slightly and made direct eye contact with me across the ballroom. She extended her hand in a small gesture, requesting the envelope she'd given me earlier in the bridal suite. I walked it down the side aisle as quietly and carefully as possible, and placed it directly in her hand before retreating back to my position. Trust passed between us without any words needed to explain what was happening. Logan whispered something to Angela that I couldn't hear from my distance, but his body language screamed desperation in every tense line. He needed truth or he couldn't go through with this ceremony, and that much was obvious. Angela touched his face gently with her free hand, and I saw her lips form the words after this, as she referenced the envelope she was now holding. The ultimatum wasn't manipulation on her part, but pain demanding honesty before moving forward. My mind drifted during the extended music to 5 years ago in this exact same country club. I could see myself standing in a private room while Kathy and Edward told me I'd ruin Logan's future if I didn't disappear. They threatened to call my scholarship board and spread rumors about my family if I stayed with their son. The memory was so vivid I could smell Kathy's heavy perfume and feel the leather chair beneath my shaking hands. That conversation had destroyed me and built me in equal measure over the past 5 years. Angela straightened her spine and composed her expression into something that looked almost peaceful. She nodded to the officiant that she was ready to continue the processional, and walked forward with measured steps. She'd bought herself the thinking time she needed, but hadn't finalized her decision yet about what came next. The poise she maintained while being internally torn apart was remarkable to witness. The officiant began the ceremony with traditional words about love and commitment, and when he turned to Logan for the vows, I watched Logan's mouth open and then close again without sound. His eyes scanned the assembled guests like he was looking for permission, or maybe an escape route, and the silence stretched for 3 full seconds before he managed to speak the words about forsaking all others. His voice cracked on the word forsaking, and I immediately signaled the string quartet to extend their gentle underscoring, giving him cover while he collected himself. The musicians smoothly looped into an extra 8 bars without missing a beat, and I saw the lead violinist nod at me in understanding. Every second felt like walking on glass that might shatter at any moment, and I kept my hand poised near my phone in case I needed to signal another extension. Logan finally pushed through the rest of his vows with his jaw tight and his hands trembling slightly as he held Angela's, and when he finished the traditional words, his whole body sagged with relief or maybe exhaustion. The guests shifted in their seats, some looking concerned and others clearly thinking this was just normal wedding nerves, and Kathy's expression from the front row was frozen in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Angela spoke her vows next in the standard format the officiant had provided, but her voice shook in a way that could have been read as overwhelming joy or barely contained grief depending on what you were looking for. She looked directly at Kathy and Edward for a long moment, then turned her gaze to where I stood at the side of the ballroom, and finally settled on Logan with an expression I couldn't decode even though I was watching closely. Her face showed something between determination and surrender, hope and resignation, and the ambiguity kept everyone in the room suspended in uncertainty about what was actually happening. She stumbled slightly over the words about honoring and cherishing, catching herself and starting the phrase again with more firmness, and I noticed her hands gripping Logan's tighter than seemed natural for a joyful moment. The guests leaned forward slightly in their chairs, sensing something was off but unable to pinpoint exactly what, and I saw several people exchange confused glances. When Angela finished her vows, she didn't smile the way brides usually do in that moment. She just nodded once at Logan like they'd completed a difficult negotiation. The officiant moved through the ring exchange and the unity candle lighting, and then he reached the moment I'd been dreading since we started planning this event. His voice took on the formal tone required for the traditional question about objections, asking if anyone present knew any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage. Kathy's hand tightened visibly on her clutch purse. her knuckles going white as she gripped the leather, and her whole posture screamed a dare at anyone who might consider speaking up. Edward placed his hand over hers in what looked like a comforting gesture, but I could see from my angle that he was actually holding her arm down, preventing any sudden movements. The silence stretched for 5 full seconds, while 200 guests held their collective breath, and I counted each second in my head, while my own breathing felt impossible. No one spoke, but the charged atmosphere in that ballroom said everything that voices couldn't, and I watched Logan's shoulders tense as if he was half expecting someone to interrupt. The officiant waited the customary pause and then moved forward with the ceremony, and the release of tension was almost audible, even though no one actually exhaled loudly. The ceremony concluded without further incident as the officiant pronounced them married, and I immediately directed the recessional music to begin, while my mind raced ahead to the inevitable fallout waiting for us. Relief that we'd gotten through the ceremony without a dramatic scene mixed with hollow dread about what came next, and I felt both emotions sitting heavy in my chest as I watched Logan and Angela walk back down the aisle together. I guided guests toward the cocktail hour location with practiced hand gestures and quiet words to the ushers, my autopilot professionalism taking over while my heart pounded. The photographer moved to follow the couple, but I intercepted him smoothly, redirecting him toward the cocktail hour space to capture candid guest moments instead. Bree appeared at my elbow without me calling her, reading my expression, and immediately understanding that the couple needed privacy, and together we created a buffer zone between the anteroom where they'd disappeared and the rest of the event. In the private anteroom off the ballroom, I watched through the slightly open door as Angela pulled the envelope from somewhere in her dress and handed it to Logan with steady hands. He opened it slowly, his fingers fumbling with the seal, and I caught a glimpse of the words "borrowed dreams" and "we need to pause" written in Angela's neat handwriting before he angled the card away from my view. His face crumbled for just a moment, all the tension and confusion and hurt showing clearly, and then something shifted, and his expression hardened into determination as he looked at Angela with new understanding. She was asking him to postpone signing the actual marriage license, to pause before making this legal and permanent, and I saw him nodding agreement even as tears gathered in his eyes. They stood facing each other in that small room surrounded by extra chairs and coat racks, having the most important conversation of their lives in a space meant for storage. And the intimacy of it made me feel like I was intruding even though I needed to be nearby. Logan emerged from the anteroom 3 minutes later and pulled me into an empty service corridor before I could redirect him toward the reception, his hand tight on my arm but not painful. He asked me point blank about 5 years ago, his voice raw and desperate, wanting to know if his parents had forced me to leave him. I looked at his face and saw 5 years of confusion and hurt and anger all mixed together, and I made the decision to finally tell him the truth. The words came out quietly, but clearly as I explained how his parents had threatened my scholarship, how they'd promised to spread rumors about my family, how they'd told me I would destroy his future if I didn't disappear from his life completely. Everything I'd kept trapped inside for 5 years spilled out in that dim corridor, and I watched his face go through shock and rage and devastation in the space of seconds. His whole body went rigid, and then seemed to collapse inward, and he braced one hand against the wall like he needed physical support to process what I was telling him. Angela appeared behind Logan in the corridor, and I realized with a jolt that she'd heard at least the end of my explanation about the threats and manipulation. Tears were sliding down her carefully made-up face, leaving tracks through her foundation, but her composure remained intact in a way that impressed me deeply. She looked at me with something that resembled respect and maybe gratitude, and she thanked me for telling the truth here in private instead of creating a scene at the altar where everyone could watch. Her grace in this moment of personal grief was stunning, and I felt a wave of empathy for this woman who'd walked into this situation without fully understanding what she was stepping into. She reached out and touched Logan's shoulder gently, and he turned to face her with an expression that held both apology and resolve. Logan's voice was steady, but final when he told Angela he couldn't sign the marriage license while still under his parents' control, that he needed to establish real boundaries with them before he could make any permanent commitments to anyone. Angela nodded slowly, processing his words, and then she whispered 2 words that seemed to cost her everything. She said "then don't" with sad understanding, giving him permission to walk away from the legal binding they'd just performed ceremonially, and I watched 2 people choose painful honesty over comfortable performance. The decision was devastating and brave in equal measure, and I felt my own eyes burning with tears I couldn't let fall while I was still on duty. They stood there looking at each other for a long moment, and something passed between them that felt like mutual respect and shared grief for what they'd almost done. I shifted immediately into problem-solving mode because that's what my brain does when emotions threaten to overwhelm me, and I started outlining a plan to pivot the reception into a postponement announcement. My voice came out calm and professional as I explained how we could repurpose the event as a fundraiser to maintain everyone's dignity, how we could frame this as a conscious choice rather than a dramatic breakdown. The professional part of my brain took over completely, mapping logistics and timing and messaging strategies while my heart ached for all 3 of us standing in this corridor. I talked through vendor contracts and guest management and press control, and Angela and Logan listened intently with grateful expressions. They both seemed relieved to have someone else take charge of the practical details, while they processed the emotional weight of what they'd just decided, and I felt my coordinator roles settling around me like armor. Bree appeared at the end of the corridor with her tablet, and I waved her over, already knowing I'd need her help to execute this massive pivot smoothly. Bree reached me within seconds, and I pulled her into the quiet corridor where Angela and Logan stood waiting. I kept my voice low but clear as I explained we needed to convert the reception into a postponement announcement with a charitable focus, and she pulled out her tablet without hesitation. Her fingers moved across the screen as she checked our vendor contracts, nodding as she reviewed the flexibility clauses we'd built in for exactly this type of situation. Most vendors could adapt their billing if the event shifted to a charitable benefit instead of a wedding reception, she confirmed, and Nelson could relabel the floral arrangements for whatever new purpose we chose. The band could adjust their playlist away from romantic wedding music to something more appropriate for a fundraiser, and the venue staff could help us repurpose the signage and escort cards. The collective energy of problem-solving helped everyone focus on practical action instead of drowning in emotion, and I watched Angela's shoulders relax slightly as logistics replaced panic. I fired off an urgent text to Miranda explaining the situation in careful language, asking for guidance on announcement wording that wouldn't breach the NDA or open us to claims from Kathy and Edward. My phone buzzed within 3 minutes with her response, and I felt relief wash through me as I read her precise legal advice about framing the change as the couple's choice, rather than any failure or wrongdoing. She suggested specific phrases that avoided disparaging the family while maintaining everyone's dignity, and I screenshot her entire message before forwarding it to Angela so she could review the suggested wording. The legal backup gave me confidence as I prepared to face Kathy and Edward with this new plan, knowing we had documentation protecting our position. We started moving toward the ballroom to begin coordinating with the venue manager when Kathy appeared at the end of the corridor, her face tight with barely controlled fury as she demanded to know what was happening. Edward materialized beside her, his voice low and threatening as he warned us that he could blacklist every vendor in this building and destroy my business with a few phone calls. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady as I cited the specific contract language protecting us, mentioning calmly that we had documentation of their previous threats, including the voicemail Bree had preserved. I watched their expressions shift from rage to calculation as they realized we weren't defenseless, and Edward's hand tightened on Kathy's arm in a silent warning to back down. Logan stepped forward then and faced his parents directly, his voice measured but absolutely firm, as he told them he wouldn't be signing the marriage license today. He made clear he'd discuss family boundaries and their manipulation later in private, but not now in front of 200 guests who deserved better than a public scene. His independence was visible in real time, the way he held his ground without aggression, but with total resolve, and I saw him becoming his own person, right in front of me. Kathy's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't process what she was hearing, but Edward put a hand on her arm and pulled her back slightly. He recognized they'd lost this particular battle and continuing to fight would only damage their own reputation more than ours. Angela touched my elbow gently and asked if I'd stand nearby but not center stage when she addressed the guests, wanting my support without making the announcement about me or our history. I agreed immediately and mentally mapped out a position where she could see me, but guests wouldn't focus on my presence, understanding that she was thinking clearly about optics and dignity even in crisis. Her request showed strength, not weakness, and I respected her more for asking. Bree moved into action with impressive speed, pulling the venue manager aside and explaining the program changes while I texted Nelson about the floral arrangement adjustments we'd need. The venue staff scattered to their stations, reprinting escort cards and updating signage while the band leader reviewed his adjusted playlist with Bree's guidance. I watched my team execute this massive pivot with professional excellence, their competence cutting through my anxiety like a knife. We were making this work despite everything, and pride swelled in my chest even as my hands shook slightly. Nelson appeared from the ballroom with his assistant, both of them carrying boxes of new arrangement cards, and he worked quickly to swap out the wedding labels. Angela selected the charity on the spot, choosing a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, and the symbolism wasn't lost on me as I helped Nelson position the updated cards. She glanced my way with clear intention as she made the choice, and I felt the shift from spectacle to purpose happening in real time. My phone chimed with an email from Miranda containing a brief contract addendum that documented the event's change in purpose and confirmed payment protections for all vendors, plus my full planning fee. The legal backup bolstered my calm as I prepared to manage the public announcement, knowing everything was documented and protected now. I forwarded the addendum to Bree and the venue manager, creating a paper trail that would shield everyone involved. The ballroom doors opened and I could see guests mingling during the extended cocktail hour, completely unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. Angela took a deep breath and smoothed her dress, then walked toward the ballroom entrance with her head high. I positioned myself near the side wall where she could see me, but I wouldn't draw guest attention, and Bree cued the band to prepare for an announcement. Angela stepped up to the microphone looking absolutely beautiful and remarkably composed, her voice steady as she thanked everyone for coming and began explaining the situation. She told guests that she and Logan were postponing their legal marriage ceremony to focus on personal growth, and they were transforming tonight's reception into a fundraiser for educational access and opportunity. Her voice stayed vulnerable but not broken, honest without being dramatic, and I watched guests responding with sympathy instead of scandal-hungry gossip. She was controlling the narrative with genuine grace, turning what could have been humiliating into something meaningful. Logan took the microphone after Angela finished, and he owned his part in letting other people steer his life decisions for too long. He made clear this was about him choosing accountability and growth, not about blaming anyone or creating drama. He didn't name his parents, but everyone in that room understood the subtext, and his maturity in this moment impressed even me. No theatrics, no victim playing, just honest ownership of his choices and commitment to doing better. The guests began applauding, first tentatively, and then with growing enthusiasm, and I saw several people wiping their eyes as they processed the couple's courage. Kathy swept through the crowd with her practiced country club smile, touching shoulders and laughing at the right moments. But I caught the white-knuckle grip on her clutch, and the way her eyes kept darting toward the exit. Edward worked the room beside her, his voice carrying false cheer as he explained to their friends how proud he was of the young couple's maturity and thoughtful decision. I watched him calculate each conversation, spinning the story to protect their social standing while his jaw stayed tight with barely hidden anger. They were trapped by their own image obsession because making a scene now would damage them more than it would hurt us, and they knew it. Every polite word they spoke felt like swallowing broken glass, but they kept smiling and nodding because their reputation depended on appearing supportive. Kathy caught my eye across the ballroom, and her expression promised future punishment, but for now she was powerless to do anything except perform gracious acceptance. I stationed myself at my coordinator desk near the kitchen entrance and ran the adjusted program with quiet efficiency, redirecting a reporter who showed up asking questions about the postponement, and making sure every vendor got their scheduled payments exactly as our contracts specified. The caterers served dinner on time, the band transitioned smoothly into background music for the charity-focused reception, and guests seemed genuinely moved by the whole situation, instead of treating it like scandal fodder. My feet ached in the blue dress shoes, and exhaustion was creeping into my bones, but I kept my voice steady and professional as I coordinated timing cues and managed last-minute adjustments. Bree handled the donation table setup while I confirmed final counts with the venue manager, and everything flowed forward despite the emotional chaos that had erupted just hours earlier. The reception felt almost normal on the surface, like we'd planned it this way all along, and that small victory kept me going through the tiredness. Bree found me during a brief lull and pulled me into a quiet corner, her phone showing text messages from 3 different guests, asking if I'd somehow sabotaged the wedding on purpose. The rumor was spreading among Kathy and Edward's social circle, painting me as the villain who manipulated the situation, and I felt the sting of it, even though I'd expected exactly this kind of blame shifting. I texted Miranda immediately, and she responded within minutes, advising me to prepare a simple neutral statement if anyone asked directly about my role in the postponement. The press line she suggested was basic and professional, just saying I supported my clients' choices and respected their privacy during a personal decision. I drafted it into my notes app and sent it to Bree so we'd both have the same response ready, then took a deep breath and went back to managing vendor coordination. The gossip hurt, but it didn't surprise me because people like Kathy and Edward always found ways to protect themselves by blaming others. Nelson caught me during a vendor break near the loading dock where he was packing up extra supplies, and he thanked me directly for protecting everyone's interests during the crisis. His words were genuine and warm, not the fake politeness I'd been getting from some guests, and he mentioned he'd already decided to refer future clients to me based on how I'd handled everything today. The compliment hit me hard because I'd been so focused on just surviving the event that I hadn't thought about professional reputation beyond avoiding disaster. His validation reminded me that competent people recognize competence under pressure, and vendors talk to each other about which planners are worth working with. I thanked him with real emotion in my voice, fighting back tears of relief that threatened to spill over, and he squeezed my shoulder briefly before heading back to finish his breakdown work. That small moment of professional respect felt like oxygen after drowning. Logan found me late in the reception when most guests had moved to the terrace for after-dinner drinks, pulling me into a quiet corner near the coat check where we wouldn't be seen. He looked tired and raw, his tie loosened and his eyes red from stress, and he asked me quietly if we could try again now that everything was out in the open. I shook my head and told him no, not now while everything was still so messy and painful, and watched his face fall before I explained we needed time and space and actual healing first. He nodded slowly and promised he'd disentangle himself from his parents' control, find a good therapist, and do the real work before we even considered starting anything romantic. The promise felt real instead of desperate, and hope flickered in my chest, despite my determination to stay cautious. We agreed to check in with each other in a few months after he'd made progress on boundaries, and I'd recovered from this nightmare, and his acceptance of that timeline impressed me more than grand gestures would have. Angela found me in a service hallway during event breakdown, when vendors were loading equipment and staff were clearing tables, and she pulled me into a tight hug that caught me off guard. She thanked me for protecting the dignity of this impossible day, her voice thick with emotion but steady, and told me she was grateful I hadn't let her walk into a marriage built on lies, even though the truth had been painful. I hugged her back and told her she'd been incredibly brave, and we stood there for a moment just holding each other up. Mutual respect flowed between us without needing many words, because we were two women who'd protected each other when it mattered most, choosing honesty over comfortable pretending. She pulled back and wiped her eyes carefully, then smiled at me with real warmth before heading back to finish saying goodbye to guests. The brief connection felt meaningful in a way that surprised me. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Miranda with a draft settlement addendum attached, and I read through it twice to make sure I understood every clause. She'd secured my full payment with no deductions or penalties, added mutual non-disparagement language that bound Kathy and Edward just as much as it bound me, and released me from the most restrictive NDA clauses that had been choking me for months. The legal protection felt like armor wrapping around me as I read each carefully worded paragraph, and relief washed through my whole body when I saw their attorney's signature at the bottom, confirming they'd already agreed to the terms. Miranda's note explained they'd signed quickly because refusing would have required explaining their coercive tactics to their lawyer, and they'd chosen to cut their losses instead. I was finally legally protected and free from their worst threats. Over the next 48 hours, I heard through Miranda that Kathy was attempting to control the narrative through her social contacts, making phone calls and sending carefully worded emails to shape how people understood the postponement. But Edward counseled her to maintain a low profile because pushing too hard would risk someone discovering their manipulation tactics and threats, and they were more afraid of exposure than they were angry about losing control. The gossip died down faster than I'd expected, as other society drama captured people's attention, and Kathy's attempts to paint me as a villain mostly fizzled out. Miranda confirmed that they were effectively contained by their own fear, trapped by the documentation we had of their coercion, and unable to attack me without risking everything. Their power over me was finally broken. Several vendors posted positive reviews over the following week praising my professionalism during a difficult situation, and I watched my business inquiry emails tick up modestly as word spread through professional networks. The boost wasn't dramatic or life-changing, but it was real and earned through competence instead of connections, and I felt cautious optimism about my company's future for the first time in months. Bree and I celebrated the small victory with takeout in my office, reviewing the new client inquiries and talking about how we'd handle the next few months. My business wasn't saved overnight, but it wasn't dying anymore either, and that felt like enough. Logan moved into a small apartment across town within the week and started weekly therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in family systems and boundaries. He texted Angela a long message thanking her for her grace and promising to give her all the space she needed. And he sent me one brief text saying he was doing the work to become someone worthy of a real relationship, instead of a controlled performance. The message was simple and honest without any dramatic declarations or promises he couldn't keep, and his quiet accountability impressed me more than grand romantic gestures would have. He was choosing to be lonely and do the hard work instead of rushing into anything, and that made me believe he might actually change. Over the next week, Angela started handling the practical stuff that comes after calling off a wedding. She returned all the rented items to the vendors, canceled the honeymoon reservations, and emailed everyone who needed to know the wedding wasn't happening legally, even though the reception had gone forward as a fundraiser. I helped her coordinate the return of the leftover wedding favors to the scholarship charity we'd supported at the reception, loading boxes into my car and driving them to the nonprofit's office downtown. Angela took 2 full weeks off work, telling her boss she needed time to figure out what came next in her life. Every decision she made felt solid and clear, like she was reclaiming pieces of herself she'd given away while pretending everything was fine. I watched her handle each task with quiet strength, and I genuinely admired how she was choosing self-respect over trying to salvage something broken. 4 weeks after the wedding day that wasn't really a wedding, Kathy and Edward hosted a smaller charity luncheon at the country club, using some of the leftover decorations from the reception. The event was their way of keeping up appearances and controlling the story their social circle would tell about what happened. I heard about it through Nelson, who provided fresh flowers for the tables, and he mentioned the luncheon got positive coverage in the local society pages. Kathy and Edward managed to emerge from the whole situation with their reputation mostly intact, spinning the postponement as a thoughtful pause rather than a crisis. Their ability to adapt and protect themselves reminded me they weren't cartoon villains or purely evil people, just calculating survivors who'd learned how to manage damage and maintain their social standing. They scared me less now, but I also respected their skill at self-preservation even if I hated their methods. 3 months after the wedding day, Logan texted asking if I'd meet him for coffee at a neutral cafe downtown, and I agreed because enough time had passed that I felt ready. We sat across from each other at a small table near the window, both of us awkward and careful with our words. He told me about his therapy sessions and how he was learning to set boundaries with his parents, and I shared how my business was slowly recovering. We talked honestly about maybe trying a relationship again but keeping it slow, with both of us staying in separate therapy and no official labels yet. The conversation felt strange, hopeful, and uncomfortable at the same time, like we were meeting each other fresh instead of picking up where we'd left off 5 years ago. We agreed to see each other again the following week, just coffee and talking, nothing rushed or dramatic. The desperate longing we'd both carried for years had shifted into something quieter and more cautious, a warmth that didn't demand immediate answers. That same week, 2 new clients contacted me through referrals from vendors who'd worked the wedding, and I signed both contracts after careful review. The boost to my business felt earned through competence rather than connections, and I updated my internal thinking about how I'd run my company going forward. My public motto would stay the same because it genuinely reflected my values, but privately I'd learned I could say yes to dreams while also saying no when someone's dream required hurting me. I'd set boundaries now, protect myself, choose clients who respected me as a professional instead of seeing me as a tool for their games. Life wasn't perfect or tied up neatly, but it felt real and genuinely mine for the first time in years, built on truth instead of fear or other people's control. So yeah, that's the story. Nothing scripted, just me sharing something that stuck with me. Thanks for listening. It really feels like chatting with a buddy. Subscribe if you want to keep hanging out.